Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We have an extremely exciting day 147 here. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, usually what we do here is we answer one question about work, sometimes with a guest. And today we're going to start with one, and then we're just going to keep rolling because we have a special guest here who is Reed Hunt, who I got to know at first through his work investing in and serving on the boards of technology companies, from new startups and domains like everything from IT to clean tech to he was on the board of Intel. And one of the things, but only one for which Reed is known, is he was the chair of the FCC under President Clinton. And so in an era that not so dissimilar from today was an era of grappling with regulatory questions about technology, Reed really defined how America came to relate to some of these questions. So I'm going to start with a general one, which is, if you're an entrepreneur now, and I was talking to, not going to disclose who, but some family members of yours who are in the like you in the entrepreneurship business, and you were trying to start something either in business entrepreneurship or nonprofit entrepreneurship, what are the areas that you would be focused on right now?
So Roy, great to be with you.
So fun. Thank you.
I am really right about trends. I am never really wrong about trends.
I have an occupation for you as a venture capitalist then, but please tell me.
But the thing is that knowing how to capture the value in the trends, that I'm not so right about that. I mean, that's actually the hard part. But I think and I certainly have experienced, you never want to fight the trend, right? You always want to go with the trend. And exactly how to capture the value is like, well, that's exactly what surfing is all about. You know the wave, you get the wave, you time it right. But after that, there's a lot of skill in actually surfing it. So with that warning, I'm going to tell you the two big things that really are not for profit activities.
Okay.
And then the two big that I think are for profit, and then the thing to stay away from. But these are just trends. Okay, the not for profit. So there's a crying need for really able, really digital people to be in the government. This is true at the state level, which has been demonstrated by the miserable performance of pretty much every state government in dealing with the pandemic. It is true at the national level. And the fundamental problem, and I really do have a lot of experience in this, the fundamental problem is that people above a certain age, let's maybe say 40, they really don't know how to communicate in the digital world. And if you can't communicate in government, you can't win. It isn't BS communicating, it's reaching people, right? So the Biden administration, which is the mother of all alumni groups, is basically old. It's basically old. And there's a tremendous opportunity over the next couple of years for people aged 21 to 35 to kind of enter into government. And you don't have to do it for very long. But if you do it for a couple of years, you'll make a big contribution to the future of the country and the future of your friends. And there's just a crying need. So that's number one. Number two, it is really not going to be a good idea to invest very much in the transition from carbon to clean, at least not for entrepreneurs. It's really not a good field for entrepreneurs. It is a great field for not-for-profit.
Say more.
Most of the changes in the transition from carbon to clean will be driven by a public investment, big scale private equity investment, and regulation. And there's not very much room for entrepreneurship there. There is a lot of room for deep R&D for major breakthroughs, but major breakthroughs in R&D. Yeah, that's science, right?
And so if you're your run-of-the-mill then business founder who wants to figure out what areas to work in, you've seen several phases of these. Okay, what would you do though?
I wouldn't do that. I would do two things. I would invest in any workflow software business. It has to be
a work-focused investor. I mean, I could say that we sorted out for you to say that, but we're on.
Well, no, but it's true, and workflow. You can talk about it in verticals. You can talk about it in healthcare. You could talk about it. You could talk about workflow in government. You could talk about workflow in business, in businesses generally. But in every sector that you look, and I know you already know this, what you see is that the actual job of pulling people together and having them collaborate and work is now being done on software platforms that are 10, 20, and even 30 years out of date. It's not video enough. It doesn't have the ability to grab data enough. You don't produce the work efficiently enough. And there are innumerable opportunities
Amen.
to improve the workflow. And then number two is the one that you and I were talking about a little while ago, which is not just in workflow, but in all management of data. There is tremendous opportunity in healthcare. And the reason that I distinguish healthcare and energy is the following. The job in healthcare is fundamentally a for-profit software-driven job. The job in energy is heavy-duty capital investment.
Sure.
And those are hugely different activities.
Yeah.
So if you want to join a private equity firm that wants to invest in transmission, well, that's okay. Right. You'll find a lot of work.
If you're trying to raise, $500,000 to $1 million for your pre-seed round of your startup, you got other things to do. And so I think it's a rare way of thinking to be able to say, here's a problem I want to solve. What is the type of entity that is best suited in the current setup of our world to solving that problem? And I think something that you kind of alluded to there was, who are the people going into government? You've had, and there are now a few more of us who you've obviously served in government in a very different capacity than I did, but who have crossed over. A lot of folks in tech and in the business world generally look at government, they say, look at how incompetent this is. It can't get the vaccine rollout right. It can't get this right. It can't get the crime right. And there's a belief that the people working in government are not as good, not as talented as the people working in business, that, you got to be capitalist to get the best possible people. Not my experience. And I'm just curious if you had to sort of lay out for folks what it's like working in government versus in the business world, and what folks should know about those as career paths, the quality of people. What words of wisdom do you have? Not advice, but just wisdoms for people.
Speaking from experience, basically, you can do everything. You can do pretty much anything you want in government. If you have the willingness to make somebody unhappy and to make sure that you have some base that you are making happy, you can do pretty much anything you want, right? So they give me this job because I, was rigorous interviews and the meritocracy, and just a coincidence that I went to high school with the vice president and went to law school with the president.
There you go.
So I get to be the chair of the Federal Communications Commission, and this is really the God's truth. I walk into the place and I find out the following. Congress has just asked the FCC, this is the early 90s, has just asked the FCC to totally create from scratch the digital mobile industry in the United States. And the internet has just been commercially invented by breakthroughs in the browser, specifically Andreessen's browser.
And CSA Mosaic, yeah.
Right. So this is November 93. In January of 94, I come out to the Stanford Park Hotel in Menlo Park, and I have breakfast with all the CEOs of the tech industry, and they all tell me there's going to be a war between computing and communications, and computing has to win. And I say, how do we know if it wins? And they say, when the internet is the dominant medium, it means computing is won. And then they say, you have to decide. Do you want to be with the winner, or do you want to be the guy that fights change? And I go back and I talk to the people at the FCC, and we go I think we should be with the winner.
Yeah, sure. That sounds
right? Good. And then we don't know what to do, because the entire regulatory and business landscape of the United States is built around the Bell telephone system, whereas what we really want is a data network.
Right.
And we also want it to be wireless. That's the demands, right? So to make a very interesting story really short, we hire 400 people. We hire economists, computer scientists. I called Andy Grove at Intel, said, fire me somebody and so I can hire them, and then they'll come back and tell us what to do. And he said, that's a weird request, and that's what he did.
I love that.
And so we recruited people all over the country, and we lowered the average age and brought in a whole bunch of people that are now not young anymore, but at the time they were And it was a really, really great team. And it was not unlike building a great team in a startup.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen these moments in government where you have some passion around a mission and a leader, and all of a sudden you get galvanized into doing great things. And so, maybe what folks are thinking when they look at government and say can't do it is they're just talking about parts of government that are more sclerotic and don't have that same kind of dynamic leadership or the structure set up where they can hire people. I mean, well, I ask it differently, which is when government fails to do that, why does it fail to do that?
Well, the last 4 years, it's because
that one. I mean, come on.
It's because of who was at the top. I mean,
suspended the laws of physics in some way.
Yeah, for the last 4 years. But in this administration, you've actually got, and it's already a tremendous amount of change, but you've actually got a whole bunch of people coming in that want to do for this era what I was telling you about in the early 1990s.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I observed the seeds of that in the Obama administration with all the different agencies bringing in technical talent. Now you've got groups like Digital Response. And so if you were sitting in your old job now, and I ask you a hard one, how would you see the questions at hand? I mean, they've evolved.
Okay, so here are the big issues in the communications computing landscape, since you asked. Number one is what everybody refers to in Washington as Section 230, right? Yeah. And so what that means is, does user-generated content, in some way is the social media platform, Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, are they responsible in some way for the user-generated content? So I was there when we wrote Section 230, and we were monumentally naive. We really did not imagine. We really thought user-generated content would be controlled by the user that generated the content.
Right.
What we did not imagine is the Meta company that would figure out all the themes and all the code words and all the kind of aggregated value of that information. We did not imagine that the Meta company would come into existence.
Right.
The excuse for our naivete is that there were many laws that banned the telephone company from using user information, right? So the whole framework of communication for the previous literally 100 years had been that no company can use that information.
Fascinating.
Right, and then in comes this people on the platform of digital and computer, and they go like, hey, we'll just invent all these algorithms and we'll use that which the phone company is not permitted to use, or the cable company is not permitted to use. So we did not anticipate that they would exist. Now they do exist, and they do many great things. And the social media platform is very, very relevant to all Americans perfecting the great advantage of America, which is we are the most successfully self-critical society in history. But they also create a platform for disinformation that obviously threatens the survival of the republic and the democracy. And so there has to be a new framework for Section 230 or some kind of light touch, regulation that just has to be. That's number one. Number two, it is a unforgivable sin that for 20 years we have not guaranteed that high-speed broadband is a universal right, even if you don't have a nickel to spend on it.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to have that, just in the same way that in an earlier generation,
you have to electrify the grid and all that.
Correct. You just have to have that if you want to be a modern and reasonably fair society. So that's number two, right? And then number three, the 20 years of battle over net neutrality has to be brought to an end in some manner. And the deal, I think, is pretty obvious, but it's not that easy in politics to make it happen. But the deal is the really important companies that control access to the internet, and they're not very many, right? And the really important companies that control the manipulation of the data, and they're not very many, right? Those companies basically have to be in an agreement where they will not use their power to extinguish the opportunity of an entrepreneur to use the internet to say, here am I, I'd like to have you pay attention to me, right? That's the issue, right?
I think that's powerful. All right, just because we have a couple more minutes, I'm going to do two quick fires now for you. and you can feel free to decline on either one, but I'm curious for your perspective. So the traditional communications enterprises that you looked at in the 90s were structured very differently than the tech companies of today. They treated their employees differently. And by the way, they were great innovators in their time, right? Bell Labs and et cetera. One major way that they were different was labor got pretty organized at many of those companies relatively early on. Yep. Today in the tech industry, we have the beginnings of seeing organized labor. There's now a Google union. We've seen some movements to organize the contractors who are on platforms like Uber. What are your thoughts on the role of labor and organized labor in the tech and business ecosystem of today?
Great question. So a tech CEO has two choices and only two choices. If you want to have the union, then you don't deal with the employees, you deal with the union rep. Mm-hmm. That's choice one. If you don't want to have the union, then you get to deal with all the employees en masse yourself. But the idea that you don't have to talk to the employees, either through their rep or directly, that's the one thing that's not possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what you see now didn't exist in the union environment, which is mass meetings, mass communication by the CEO being put on the griddle and fried. I'm saying the CEO has to pick one or the other. Most of them don't pick the union. And so now they have to become, well, they would hate this description, but they kind of have to become politicians.
Yeah, I think that, this was an observation I had in city government was a lot of the senior folks said, look, if you look at non-founders, but the executive leadership of many large companies, the skill set doesn't look in some ways that different from being an elected official.
And the same ethics.
Yeah.
You can't mistreat the employees. You have to be attentive to all gender issues, all ethnic issues. By the way, all the good ones, they get this right away. They learn and they say, help me learn. And if I didn't understand, this happened to Satya Nadella. He made a couple of mistakes in this respect in the first few months at Microsoft, and he corrected.
Yeah, he figured it out. Yeah, I mean, I love that. And Mike Bloomberg has this joke. He says the difference between business and government is in business, it's dog eat dog, and in government, it's the reverse. And I kind of think of that. All right, last quick fire. Bitcoin, ?
I had one, and I sold it too soon.
Uh-oh.
I mean, he only needed one, it turned out, to get like a lot of money.
Sure. So, car money. It's not bad. So now you're in the camp of wish I had held.
That's exactly right, Roy.
I like it. All right. Well, Reed, I would just want to say thank you for those of you who are joining us for the first time. The reason this is not advice is because even for somebody as wise as Reed, we are not sharing how you should live your life. It's just our own experiences, and then you're going to make your own judgments. And we'll be back tomorrow and continuing this week. And Reed, I just want to say thank you for joining us, and I would love to have you back again.
Thank you, Roy.